Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Book 5 of the Wolfman Chronicles, Chapter 5, A Wolf Dance. That's episode 56. We're in Russia, we're in Alaska. Vitya was what you called a pessimist in Russia, a pessimist. He had no faith in his fellow human beings to do what they said they would, no matter how much they professed their loyalty. People, men and women alike, could not be trusted to carry out their word no matter the circumstance. He learned at a very young age not to grow attached, to never fall in love and never trust anyone, and that's why he was good at his job. He had grown up through the ranks, seen more than his fair share of violence and betrayal before he was even a young man. Every scar he bore told a story of misplaced trust and brutal lessons learned. Vitya's outlook was shaped by a world that had repeatedly shown him its dark side. He navigated through life like a shadow, rarely seen. Conversations were tactical negotiations. Friendships were merely transactions. And love was a luxury he could not afford. Love. And he hated the sound of the word. Though he'd had many women, there was only one he had ever really wanted. The one who had never given herself to him. He remembered the first time he'd met her. Peter had brought his beautiful wife with him to an event that Vitya had attended. One look at her, and he had to have her. Peter was a foolish, careless man and didn't deserve to have a wife like that. Vitya had taken Peter under his wing, given him a job just so that he could seduce his wife. But Sasha, she always refused him. Any other woman would have given themselves freely, in fear for their life or that of their husbands, but not Sasha. The more she rejected him, the more he had to have her. Taking Natya was both an act of revenge and punishment. He had wanted to hurt Sasha by taking the one thing that mattered to her. But over the years he had grown fond of the young girl and had carried the hope that Natya would turn into one of his best agents. She was a quick learner, ruthless and precise. She could kill a man and walk away with no remorse, no regret. Considering that she was his youngest agent, she showed far more intelligence and maturity than many of his seasoned trainees. But everything changed when she fell in love with Iger. She got sloppy, she got stupid. Vitya knew she was no longer worth the money nor the time. She had chosen her dreams over reality. Sending her to Alaska to find Sasha was his way of getting rid of her, both of them. He knew she would fail to get the jewel, fail to confront her mother, betray him. She was too much like her mother, after all, and the thought of that made his blood boil. Vitya was the head of a Russian crime syndicate called the Organization. It operated independently, yet was contracted by the government to provide certain services which might be needed discreetly as the situation might call for. The organization was built on the principle of fear and manipulation, two skills that Vitya had mastered to perfection. He understood that in the world of espionage and crime, weakness could be exploited and strength could be feigned. Vitya's methods were systematic and calculated and left no room for error. He instilled fear in his trainees, not just as a controlling force, but as a tool to mold loyalty. Those who operated under him knew that betrayal came with a heavy price. Loyalty was Vitya's currency, and betrayal was a sin punishable by death. When the Orlov diamond was to be on display for Her Majesty the Queen, former Duchess of Cornwall, as part of the invitation to visit the Kremlin shortly after her coronation, the organization, that Vitya headed was hired to provide the security. The royal family refused to accept the invitation in protest of Russia's recent invasion of the Ukraine, and the invitation was furthermore rescinded. In a list of every important who's who from nearly every country on the globe, diplomats from every country except 6 were invited to attend the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II and the coronation of the new king and queen. Afghanistan, Belarus, Myanmar, Syria, Venezuela, and Russia were all denied invitations. Additionally, Iran's invitation was rescinded. The implications of this snub were profound. The cancellation of the viewing of the Orlov diamond paled in comparison. But to Vitya, it symbolized the isolation he had spent his whole life navigating around, crafting an empire in the shadows while the world turned its back. His decision to steal the diamond and plant it on an unsuspecting ambassador of the British Embassy in Moscow would cause an international media storm. The chaos that would ensue would shake the foundations of diplomatic relations, giving him leverage to manipulate events in his favor. And Peter was just the man for the job. And if Peter had failed, which was likely, Sasha would then be his. She would have no choice. In order to save her husband's life and regain her child, she would have to submit to Vitya's demands. But Peter had not followed the plan. He had killed his comrades and ran with the jewel, and in a strange twist of fate, Peter was now dead, and Sasha was in possession of the Orlov diamond. Now, Vitya didn't think it would take so long to find and capture her. He had sent men to New York to get her and bring her back to Russia. Now, when that failed, he'd sent more men to Montana. Well, that too had failed. And sending Natya to find her mother was a necessary sacrifice, even though he knew Natya would betray him. Seeing her daughter again would weaken Sasha's resolve. He had no doubt he'd be able to capture her now. Sasha's focus would be on her daughter rather than on her own survival. When it came right down to it, Vitya admitted to himself it was no longer about the diamond at all. This was a chance between wolf and prey, and it was all about capturing Sasha. Vitya was in the shower when his phone rang. He didn't pick up the call. Sasha found the address of the man that Jack had given her. It was a small office in a strip mall sandwiched between a seedy-looking pawn shop with a display window that looked like it hadn't been washed in years, and a nail salon. A handwritten note was taped to the inside of the door that read back at 2. It was now 3:45. Sasha tried the door handle. It was locked. She peered through the glass door but didn't see any movement inside the small shop. The sign on the door read Charles H. Goodnight, CPA. However, someone had turned the P into an R and added another P at the end with a marker. Charles H. Goodnight, C-R-A-P was how it read now, and it looked like it'd been that way for a while. Where did Jack find this guy, Sasha wondered. Jack had told her to take pictures with her phone of Natya and Igor's face, and this guy would make fake identification cards and passports for him, for a good sum of money, of course. Now, she glanced up and down the sidewalk at the other shops lining the small parking lot. There were no cafes or coffee shops that she might wait in. So she got back in the rental car to drive back to the hair salon where she had left Juanita. They'd already picked up all the groceries and supplies on their list, so now the only errand left was the CPA/document forger. Sasha peeked in the window of the salon and saw Juanita with her back turned, getting her hair trimmed. She decided to walk back to the rental car and try to give Jack another call. Cell reception was intermittent at best back at the house, and she'd already tried to phone him a couple times with no success. She climbed into the vehicle, trying to decide if she should wait for Juanita or drive back to Goodnight's office to see if he had returned. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. So maybe I'll just take a quick nap, she had decided. She hadn't slept well the previous night, and a small nap really might do her some good. Juanita had everyone in the hair salon laughing as she recounted the story of her disastrous wedding parade through the streets of Santiago. Of the 3 hairstylists and 2 other female clients, only one of them had ever been to her country. "I've seen Mexico," the bleached blonde, heavy-set woman in her early 50s claimed excitedly. "My husband and I took a cruise ship there for a honeymoon. Mostly we stayed in our cabin," she laughed. "But we did walk through the tourist shops in Cabo San Lucas." Juanita shook her head in disbelief. "Visiting Cabo and saying you've seen Mexico is like visiting Disneyland and thinking you've seen the United States. It's a whole different country than what you see from the cruise ship." "Well, isn't it all just drug cartels and crime? I mean, I wouldn't want to go there. It's not safe. They're all rapists and murderers," the other woman replied, her gray hair now masked, the perfect shade of red to match her nails. Juanita glared at her. "Yeah, I killed 3 people before I drove a truckload of cocaine across the border." That should shut her up, she hoped. The woman with the red hair and the nails clutched her purse a little closer to her chest and stared out the window. Attempting to change the subject, Juanita's hairstylist started talking about her children and the recent field trip they'd taken to the glacier ice fields. That spurred a conversation about Mendenhall Glacier and the major flooding that had occurred in Juneau back in August. Flooding was caused by a glacial outburst, when water that is dammed up by a glacier suddenly gives way and is released downstream. I heard that like almost 15 billion gallons of water was released from Suicide Basin, and that much water would fill more than 22,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, the bleached blonde woman declared. "My daughter, she lives there, and she said hundreds of homes were just sitting in water. It was terrible." Juanita rolled her eyes. It was exhausting listening to the banter of these women. "Are you done yet?" she asked her stylist. "Well, don't you want me to blow dry it?" the girl asked. Juanita sighed. "Look, I've been in here an hour already. Can you hurry up?" She glanced at her phone. She expected to see a message from Sasha asking when to pick her up. There were no messages. She should have heard from her by now. She dialed Sasha's number and was surprised that it went straight to voicemail. She sent her a text, "We're ready to be picked up." Didn't get a response to that either. She tried again. "Where are you?" she typed into her phone. Again, nothing. Should I be worried? Juanita wondered. She'd let her stylist finish blowing her hair dry, then quickly paid her, and she left the salon. She saw the car parked a short distance down the street, began walking towards it. Something wasn't right. The car was unlocked and empty, except for the bags of groceries in the back seat. Sasha's phone was lying on the console and the keys were in the ignition. There was no sign of Sasha. She glanced up and down the street, looking at the shops that lined the sidewalk. It just didn't seem likely that Sasha would have gone into a store without at least taking the keys and locking up the vehicle. With that, a knot tightened in Juanita's stomach as her pulse quickened. "This isn't like her," she muttered under her breath. She quickly dialed Jack's number, but she received no answer. A wave of panic washed over her. "Okay, what do I do now?" she remarked out loud to herself, glancing around as if searching for any clue to Sasha's whereabouts. Desperation began to gnaw at her as she dug into her pocket and fished out her phone again. She clicked on Sasha's text messages, scrolling back through their recent exchanges, seeking anything out of the ordinary. Then a chilling thought crept into her mind. Could the organization have taken her? Juanita thought back over the events of the morning. They dropped Kat and Usko off at the airport. Then they headed to the grocery store. Well, they'd both gone in. It was possible someone had seen her there. Afterwards, they'd gone to the hardware store. Juanita tried to remember if there'd been any interactions with other customers or if anyone had any particular interest in either one of the 2 women. She found the crumpled receipt from a nearby cafe where they'd stopped for lunch. There had been other patrons in the cafe. Juanita tried to remember their faces. Had someone followed them? Juanita dug through Sasha's purse, which still lay on the floorboard, and she found the note Jack had written with the name and the address of the man who was supposed to make the fake identification cards. She knew that that's where Sasha was heading after she dropped Juanita off at the hair salon, so that would be the first place she'd check. Bracing herself for what lay ahead, she turned the key in the ignition, fear flooding her veins, because if Sasha was in trouble, Juanita would have to face whatever demons awaited her, whether they were human or otherwise. Rosa brought a plate of sandwiches out onto the big deck overlooking the meadow, as if the events of the morning had never occurred. Jack had been checking his phone regularly. I haven't heard from the girls. Sasha should be heading back by now. I can't get any damn reception here. After lunch, let's drive up the road a distance and see if we can get a call to go through. Are you worried? Julian asked. Well, Jack nodded his head. It's just with all the activities here this morning, I want to make sure they made it to Fairbanks all right. Natya took a bite of her sandwich, then pushed it away. I'm sorry, I can't eat. Vitya sent those men. He will send more. He's not going to stop till he gets what he wants. We've got to get that jewel to him somehow. None of us are safe until that happens. Igor nodded. He was not too much for conversation and still felt a little bit uncomfortable with the language. He could understand everything that was said, but still had difficulty speaking in English. Russian was his first language, and he could speak Ukrainian and other Slavic languages fluently, whereas Natya felt as comfortable speaking English as she did Russian. Learning languages and dialects had come easy for her. That was a skill that had come in handy many times, helping her to keep her anonymity during various assignments. Grizzly reached over to take Nadia's sandwich. Well, if you're not going to eat this, I will. Rosa slapped his hand away and pushed the plate back towards Natya. Eat, child. You need your strength. She glared at Grizzly. I'll make you another one. Well, Grizzly grumbled a thank you, but his eyes lit up as he watched Rosa retreat to the kitchen. He turned back to Jack. We got some dead bodies out there to drag off. It'll bring the wolves and the bears, and we need to take care of that right soon. Yeah, you're right, Jack agreed. Let's finish up and get those bodies loaded into the back of the truck. We do need to get those moved as soon as possible. You can drive right up to the top of that ridge over yonder and drop them right off. The bears will have a feast tonight, Grizzly replied. Well, what about that guy in the trap? You think he's still alive? No, I checked, Miguel said. He's dead. Okay, we got our work to do, Jack said, and we need to prepare for the next onslaught. I do need to check on the girls, though, but I guess that can wait. I'm sure they're heading back here now. The thought made him uneasy, though. He had a feeling that something just wasn't right. There was no justification for that, he decided, just an uneasiness from not hearing from her. But on the other hand, she'd probably tried to call numerous times and hadn't been able to get the call to go through. Worrying wouldn't do him any good, he decided, so he headed out with the guys to gather up the dead Russians. Juanita banged on the door of the CPA. Your title fits you, you piece of crap, she yelled through the locked door. The handwritten note still hung there, back at 2. The stores on either side of his small office had closed signs in their windows. At the corner of the small strip mall was a liquor store. Juanita walked up to the counter. I'm looking for a woman that might have been in here earlier, pretty, long blonde hair, wearing a white jacket with a fur collar. Maybe you saw her? The fellow behind the counter shook his head. Juanita got a feeling that if the Pope himself had recently been in the store, he would not have noticed. His eyes were glued to the Brazilian soccer game strategically placed between 2 other small television sets that showed the interior of the store, presumably to catch shoplifters. Thanks a lot, Juanita muttered as she turned to leave. She noted that the attendant's eyes never left the TV monitor. He was fully absorbed in that soccer match. Muttering a few choice expletives as she backed out of the parking lot, she hesitated. Should she drive to the police station and report Sasha missing? Drive home and let Jack handle it? Keep searching? The options swirled in her mind, but as the gripping sense of urgency clawed at her, she realized that time was slipping away. Every passing moment might make a difference between finding her and losing her completely. "Vitya, I've been trying to reach you," the voice on the other end of the line spoke in a husky, deep voice, speaking in Russian. "We found her." Vitya paused before answering, steadying his voice. "Which one, Natya or Sasha?" "The mother," he replied. "Is she alive?" Vitya asked. He made it clear that he would prefer to have her taken alive. Yet her death would mean an end to the torment he felt inside whenever he thought of her in someone else's arms. "She's alive. She's roughed up just a bit. She fought like a banshee until the drugs took effect," a husky voice replied. "What do you want us to do with her?" "Keep her there for me. I'm coming to Alaska," Vitya replied. Juanita was a mix of emotions. She was angry at Sasha for being careless, angry at Jack for sending her to Fairbanks, and angry at herself for not staying with Sasha and for thinking that a visit to a hair salon was necessary. Angry at being put in this situation. "I'm not a damn babysitter," she yelled as she hit her fist on the steering wheel. And she burst into tears. "I can't go to the police," she said out loud. "I don't even know if Sasha is legally in this country or by what name she's using. I've got to get back to Jack's and let him sort this out." As she started up the engine, she decided she would return to the hair salon one last time and ask if anyone had seen Sasha. Perhaps she'd left her things in the car just to walk in to let Juanita know that she was there, and maybe she'd walked into the wrong shop. Maybe Juanita had just missed her. Well, it was a long shot, to be sure, but worth checking out. She drove back across town and parked in front of the hair salon in the handicapped parking spot. She ran inside. As the bell above the door jingled loudly with the force of Juanita pushing the door open, the patrons inside, they all jumped. The woman with the red hair that matched her nails was just getting the final touches of her perm done. She screamed. "I'm not here to rob you," Juanita yelled sarcastically. "I just want to know if you saw my friend. She's about my age, long blonde hair. She's wearing a white jacket with a white fur collar. She's a white woman." Everyone just stared at her. Finally, the stylist who had trimmed Juanita's hair spoke up. "We haven't seen anyone that looked like that. No one has been here asking for you." "Thanks," Juanita muttered and turned to the door. "If she should show up by any chance, tell her I've gone to get Jack." With that, she jerked the door open and ran for the car. She sped out of town for that long drive back to Circle, Alaska. "How the hell am I going to explain this to Jack?" she muttered under her breath. The drugs were beginning to wear off, and Sasha could feel a tingling in her legs and her arms. She had a terrible headache. "Where am I?" she wondered as she gained consciousness. Suddenly the vivid memory of the attack, the man throwing open her door and yanking her by the hair out of the car, his hands over her mouth so she couldn't scream. She'd bit his hand and the taste of his blood came flooding into her memory. It made her woozy again. She remembered fighting him, trying to get away, but he was big, very big, and Russian. She remembered him cursing in her native tongue and the thought, "They've found me." She had felt the pinprick of the needle and wondered, did no one see me struggling? Did no one hear my cries for help, my screams? She glanced down at her legs, tied to the straight-back wooden chair, and felt her arms tied behind her back. Her jaw ached from the restraint that they'd tied around her mouth to prevent her from screaming. Her eyes inspected the room around her. She was in a cabin. She could see forest through the paned window and a small wood stove in the corner of the room. She tried to scoot her chair closer to the window and discovered It was bolted to the wooden floor. She felt defeated, tired. I knew they'd come for me eventually. I was foolish to think I was safe, that somehow just because I was with Jack I'd be okay. I've been living in a dream world and it was bound to catch up with me. She began to cry, softly and silently, the tears tasting salty as they dripped onto her lips. I was such a fool. And now I don't even have the diamond to trade for my life. Jack, Miguel, and Julian loaded the bodies into the back of Jack's pickup truck, meticulously searching for any forms of identification. But as they rifled through pockets, they found that not a single one of the men had so much as a wallet on him. No names, no backgrounds, no trace of lives left behind. There was no pictures of wives or children, no keepsakes or tokens that might hint as to who they once were. It was as if they'd been stripped of their identities, mere shells of flesh and bone, assassins sent by the Russian organization, killing machines molded by a crime syndicate, and might as well have been robots rather than men. The pickup rattled along the rough terrain, rocks crunching under the tires. As they crested the ridgeline, the sprawling, unbroken wilderness spread before them. They arrived at a secluded spot where an outcropping of rocks jutted out over the forest below, a place that looked as if it had never seen a human. It was here that they would dispose of the bodies. "This'll do," Jack muttered, breaking the silence. They dragged the bodies from the bed of the pickup and very unceremoniously rolled them onto the rocky ground, positioning them in the crevices between the stones. "Should we cover 'em?" Miguel asked. Jack shook his head. "No. Let nature take its course. The bears and the wolves will smell the bodies in no time." As the three men stepped back to survey the scene of dead bodies, they couldn't help but feel uneasy. And Miguel sighed. Even these monsters used to be human," he muttered under his breath. The distant sound of wolves howling echoed through the forest, a haunting melody that signaled the dance of life and death. The three men stood in silence, watching, as the first scavengers began to circle above the bodies.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope we'll see all of you here again next week for the next episode of the Wolfman Chronicles. Have a good week, everyone.